Hey, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I wanted to talk about the platform wars, the Gamefound versus Kickstarter versus BackerKit. And of course, incredible disclaimer, as I usually do in these videos, that I work for Gamefound. Please take into account every and all potential bias, although for funsies, I'll link down below to one of the first videos I did comparing the platforms way back at the very beginning before I ever worked for Gamefound, because honestly, these conversations are just conversations I enjoy. And this particular video is motivated by the fact that recently Chris from Leisure Games put out a video talking about how effectively the platforms don't matter that much. Whether it's Gamefound, BackerKit, Kickstarter, doesn't really matter. Just go ahead and launch the campaign. People will go to where the campaigns are, and it doesn't have that significant a difference. Now, two things. First of all, Chris from Leisure Games has a fantastic channel. I highly recommend checking it out. Covers a lot of crowdfunding topics, a lot of crowdfunding campaigns, isn't afraid to speak his mind. Highly recommend his channel. I also disagree with him heavily on this point. I think the platform matters so much, and I think there's a ton of data to indicate it does, both in terms of the types of campaigns that do better on one platform versus the other, because again, Gamefound bias and all that aside, I'm not saying Gamefound is the right choice for every single campaign. It absolutely isn't. There are many campaigns that are a better fit for Kickstarter, for BackerKit, but there's also many campaigns that are a better fit for Gamefound. There's different types of campaigns that fall into different groupings and patterns of the areas where one platform will be better for a campaign or not, and those things are not just trackable data from the sense of looking at things in the past, but they're trackable from the sense of being able to predict outwards, being able to look at a campaign and being able to make a reasonable prediction about how well it will do on one platform versus the other. I have some hard data to back it up. In fact, my original idea for this video was going to be just reading off of a list of a whole bunch of campaigns, but I realized that would probably be a fairly boring video, so I decided to go more into a topical aspect with some degree of hard data and some degree of talking about the nature of those edge cases. Because I think crowdfunding to a large extent really comes down to all the small things that don't affect 70-80% of your users, but they do affect 10 to 20% of people who are backing your project, and that's usually where the gap between one platform and another lies. For the most part, if you're launching a campaign on crowdfunding, you're not looking at, possibly raising $1 million on Kickstarter and raising $2 million on Gamefound. That's never really the conversation you're looking at. But you are looking at times where you might raise $1 million on Kickstarter or $1.2 million on Gamefound, or you might raise $400,000 on Gamefound and $450,000 on Kickstarter. There are absolutely edge cases of where those numbers and differentials will occur, and for speaking frankly, if you're a creator, those numbers and differentials matter a lot. Getting a 10 to 20% difference in what your campaign can bring in is absolutely a factor, although one factor amongst many for why a creator might choose to launch their platform and launch their campaign on one platform as another. Now, first of all, in terms of the hard data aspect, the video I'm going to link to down below, the video I did well before I ever worked for Gamefound, was a comparison of not apples to apples, but the closest thing you can do to apples. The tricky part about comparing crowdfunding success is you can never point at a campaign and say, look exactly how this campaign did on one platform as the other, because even the same exact campaign is taking place at a different time, and so you can never really look at an exact comparison, an exact case study of how a campaign will do. Even those few times where you have a campaign launch on one platform and shortly after followed up another platform, or if you have a cancellation and relaunch, again, there's still different situations. Cancellation and relaunch, regardless of which platform it goes to, already has that initial hype and buzz, no differently than a cancellation and relaunch in the same platform. A Kickstarter to Kickstarter cancellation and relaunch is also going to have more of a chance of success than if you had a Gamefound to Kickstarter cancellation and relaunch. Regardless of how you do it, you're always looking at different things, and so the closest thing you can do for comparison basis is not apples to apples, because that will never happen, but you could have apples to, other apples, to similar apples, but not quite the exact same apples. And to that end, one metric I've tracked very heavily while trying to get a sense of where platforms are and which ones do better are specifically in the reprint category. When you have a campaign coming to crowdfunding and that campaign is effectively having a reprint and expansion. So you have, again, whatever the game is, it might be anything from, the Ice of Farengar to Chronicles of Drenagar to a Chip Theory campaign, regardless of what it is. Whenever you have a campaign that is coming back to crowdfunding with a expansion and reprint, specifically that category, expansion and reprint, you can often track to some degree what degree of success those campaigns have. And to be very clear, you should always expect a campaign that is an expansion and reprint. On average, those campaigns should fund higher. On average, not across the board, there's never guarantees, campaigns are all over the place, but on average, a campaign that is bringing you a reprint and expansion should fund higher. There's more exposure to the campaign. People, on the one hand, some degree of that market was filled on the first campaign. When you have Oathsworn versus Oathsworn, second edition or whatnot, some degree of that market was filled. People who wanted Oathsworn already got Oathsworn, so they might come back for the expansion content or the upgrade kit or any of those things, but there's also that hype and buzz of people who are now seeing that campaign, seeing their friends have it, getting that FOMO, and wanting in on a campaign. So on average, they should fund higher. Again, not a guarantee. There are many campaigns, and again, regardless of which platform, regardless if it's Kickstarter to Kickstarter, Kickstarter to Gamefound, Gamefound to Kickstarter, Gamefound to Gamefound, regardless of where the campaigns start and end, there's never a guarantee, but there are average expectations. And to that end, the average Kickstarter to Kickstarter expansion, reprint, and expansion funds 36% higher than the original campaign. That's on average. Across hundreds of campaigns, on average, a Kickstarter to Kickstarter reprint and expansion is going to fund 36% higher. So again, if it's on Kickstarter the first campaign, it comes back to Kickstarter a year later with an expansion and reprint, it's going to fund on average 36% higher. Again, not a guarantee. If you're a creator, just to be very clear, never a guarantee. But that's the average numbers. Versus on Gamefound, the average Kickstarter to Gamefound reprint and expansion, so again, a campaign that starts on Kickstarter and then heads over to Gamefound and goes ahead and has an expansion and reprint a year and a half later, the average expansion and reprint from Kickstarter to Gamefound funds 70% higher than the original campaign. And that is that's a statistically relevant distinction between those two numbers. A 36% bump versus a 70% bump, that is a statistically relevant distinction between those. Again, never a guarantee on any individual campaign. I can point to many campaigns that went from Kickstarter to Gamefound that funded less than the original total, but I can point to many, many more that funded higher than the original total, and that's how you get to those numbers. There's a reason that in 2021, Kickstarter had 91% of the crowdfunding market share and Gamefound had 9%. In 2022, Kickstarter had 88%, Gamefound had 10%, and BackKit had 2%. And in 2023, Kickstarter had 76% of the market share versus 19% of Gamefound and 5% of BackerKit. At this point, 25% has been taken out of Kickstarter's original crowdfunding market share in the tabletop category, and my expectation is that between Gamefound and BackerKit in 2024, I assume those numbers will only continue to grow. 2023 saw the shift of Command announcing their move over from Kickstarter to Gamefound, and that's a huge chunk of crowdfunding dollars on its own from a single company, let alone the many others that are coming and or will follow. And the big part of that is going to be the growth of the platform, the growth of the user base, and those are all things, and the feature set, the growth of the feature set, all of these things add to why someone chooses one platform versus another. One of the things that I think is easy to get lost in Chris's video in general is the idea, the perception. It's so easy for us to forget that whoever is watching this, whoever you are, whoever I am, we're all such isolated instances of what a backer is, of who a backer is. Anytime someone looks at a crowdfunding campaign, anytime someone walks into a crowdfunding campaign and has a question or a frustration or something else, or even just a frustration, so often I'll see these situations where somebody's bothered because that campaign they backed a year ago said they're going to be delivering in October of 2023, and it's now October 2023 and the game's not here yet. And then you'll see a ton of other people jumping on, well, of course it's not here yet. It's only October. They said October, it's now October. What did you expect? The game to arrive? And the people will be like, well, yes, that's what they said. They said it'll arrive in October, so that's what I expected. And that's one of those things where we sometimes forget that the way we are does not represent the way everyone is, and that's where those 10 to 20% margins occur. Something fascinating about e-commerce, and fun fact, my last job before going full-time in the board game space, I was COO of an e-commerce company that all we did was build and manage e-commerce websites for other companies, and so I'm decently familiar with the e-commerce space. But one of the things that's always a fascinating just metric to think about is, on average, a 1 second increase in load time to a product page will result in an average of 7% decrease in conversion rate. In other words, if your page takes 2 seconds to load and my page takes 3 seconds to load, then I can expect 7% less sales because of that second load time. And to many people, you're sitting there and thinking, well, of course, whatever, 2 seconds versus 3 seconds, 1 second versus 2 seconds. You sit through it and you go ahead and buy the product. And for many people, yes. But for many others, they click away. 7%. Precisely. 7% is the average number of people who will click away because of that increase in 1 second of page speed load time. A big thing about the platform wars, a big thing about the Kickstarter versus Gamefound conversation is going to come down to all those small little areas where one platform is better than the other, and then trying to figure out how those areas impact your funding totals. And the most important thing is that I think Kickstarter and Gamefound have a lot of things in both camps that make one platform better or more likely to fund higher than the other. But the thing that's interesting is I think those benefits that each platform has affects different types of campaigns in different ways, which is why you see these trends of where certain types of campaigns are a better fit for Gamefound, certain types of campaigns are a better fit for Kickstarter. And I'll just go through a bunch of them, a surface level aspect of what the various perks or benefits of different platforms are, and the way those things capture different degrees of market share, and the way those things have small little measured impacts on the bottom line of how a crowdfunding campaign does. On Kickstarter side, and I'll start with Kickstarter. And Kickstarter, to be very clear, Kickstarter has fewer things, in my opinion at least, and bias aside and all that, but in my opinion, Kickstarter has fewer things that make it a better platform for the user, although some of those things have a bigger impact. So even though there are fewer things, some of those things are a bigger impact, and let's start with the biggest one, which is the user base of Kickstarter is still larger. This is one of those things, again, if you are someone who's backing a campaign, to a large extent, sure, you follow the creator. If Chip Theory Games is launching a campaign, you're a Chip Theory fan, so you follow the creator. And that's true for a lot of people, but it's not true for everyone. Kickstarter still has the larger user base relative to Gamefound, and that means that it does have those additional eyeballs, and not everyone who backs a Chip Theory game is someone who is a hardcore Chip Theory user. Chip Theory, by the very nature of being on Gamefound, means they are going to lose some eyeballs that would otherwise have discovered them on Kickstarter. Now, they have other perks to being on Gamefound. Those things are all present, but they are inherently going to lose some people that they would have gotten had they launched their campaigns on Kickstarter instead. A larger user base is a factor, and a larger user base, keep in mind that, again, for many people watching this video, you probably have a Gamefound account, you've probably backed a Gamefound project, or been in a Gamefound pledge manager. But to many other people, that just isn't the case. Many other people have not ever, backed something on Gamefound, or they may not even know what Gamefound is. And so that percentage basis of the people you automatically pull in because they're following the creator versus the eyeballs you lose because, well, they're not following the creator and they don't see the campaign, they don't want to try a new platform. Those are all things that are present and will give Kickstarter an edge in some areas, and specifically for some campaigns. This is going to be one of those areas where you'll see different types of campaigns have have a different degree of impact as far as how they get hit. A lighter, more mass market game, a party game, things like that are going to have less dedicated followers of that company, of that type of game or project. And so that's going to be an area where having more people on Kickstarter will affect things. Kickstarter still has that name brand familiarity. It still has that familiarity when you're launching a giant IP. There are many reasons why a giant IP will do better on Gamefound. In fact, if you look at the top 10 most funded campaigns of 2023, many of them across all platforms, Gamefound included, were IPs. But one of the things, again, you will lose is you'll lose that name brand familiarity. If you're coming in for the newest Marvel title, and you may not even have ever backed anything on Kickstarter or Gamefound, Kickstarter is still more of a generally known name, and so has that safe and trust perception that might not be present on Gamefound. And again, these things don't sway campaigns to the largest numbers, but they do sway the edge cases. They do turn around and turn that thing into a 7% decrease in conversion, no different than that 1 second load time, because they all have an impact on the edge cases. Kickstarter has an app. Now, a Gamefound, it's something that we have plans. But at the moment, Kickstarter does have an app. And while an app is not actually the highest amount of conversion, I have to double check my numbers on this, but I believe the numbers, if I recall correctly, are that Kickstarter's app pulls in, I think, 10% of their pledges. but 10% is still 10%. And of course, even if in that 10%, then the question is, okay, great. Well, if you talk about a Gamefound user, is it you're losing 10% of sales, or maybe 5% of those, maybe half of those 10% will convert and use the website anyway? But even if it's only half, you're still losing 5%. Those things are things that will help in favor of Kickstarter. The updates, the fact that when you read an update on a Kickstarter email, the fact that when you read that update and you can go ahead and click through and see something new versus on Gamefound you might not, and again, it might affect a small degree of people. You might have only 2% of people that don't click through and therefore don't go ahead. Well, maybe it's 10% of people don't click through, but then from those, 2% of people don't go ahead and get that add-on that they otherwise would have gotten, or increase from $1 pledge because they otherwise missed information in an update that would have converted them. But that 2% is still 2%. Whatever number those things are, they all still have an impact on the edge. So these are all things that can generally help Kickstarter outperform Gamefound on some of these margins. Now, make no mistake, I'm going to go ahead and list a bunch of Gamefound aspects as well, and these all have an impact in general. Stretch pay and installment payments are obviously a huge thing. They're a huge thing, and that's interesting is though, stretch pay and installment payments actually haven't necessarily had a huge impact on the amount people back, but it has given people a lot of reason to prefer a campaign to be on Gamefound, to prefer that as a backer. But stretch pay in general is going to give backers the tools and flexibility to back things and possibly spend more on certain campaigns, to spread out the funding, to choose a Gamefound campaign over a Kickstarter campaign. One of the things that you have to always remember, again, it's about edge cases. You might be someone who backs the campaigns you want wherever they are, and it's not about limited budget. Somebody else is trying to go ahead and float and figure out, well, I only have $500 a year to go ahead and spend, and I could back these projects over here, but Gamefound gives me the ability to spread it out over multiple payments and to budget it out over the course of the year, which is more flexibility, so that $500 gets pushed more towards a campaign that gives me that flexibility. You may not even be spending more, you may just like the flexibility that it gives you. Stretch pay has been a hugely requested feature, and it's one of those things that over the year plus now that it's been around, we've seen a huge shift in backers requesting their creators, requesting their communities to launch campaigns on Gamefound because they want that flexibility in how to manage their budget in general. And so stretch pay is going to be one of those things that will have an impact on your overall funding. Stable pledge. We over at Gamefound, we have this concept of the stable pledge, giving you basically a guaranteed refund. Like the creator has to give you a refund if they charge too much on the shipping cost or adjust the pledge cost by too much of a margin. They have to give you a refund option. And it's one of those things that's fascinating because for someone like myself, frankly, when I look at a campaign, I don't think stable pledge ever really affects my decision to back a project or not. But I know that we've run polls internally amongst our community, and we've seen that I think it was, if I recall correctly, I think 80% of users felt that stable pledge had an impact on their decision to back a campaign, which to me is wild because again, we sometimes get lost in our own perception of what matters to us, and then we project that outwards to everyone else, but that's not always the case. To me, stable pledge is a nice thing that Gamefound has done, but doesn't impact my decision to back. But when we've polled our audience, when we've polled Gamefound users, it has a very large impact on the average user's decision to back, and I was surprised by that data. But at the end of the day, again, if 5% more people back a project because it has that little stable pledge badge, that's again the margins that come into play. These are all the small little adjustments of how a campaign shifts. The fact that Gamefound has less noise, that's going to be another thing. Kickstarter has more users, but therefore it has more projects and has more noise. I don't know about you, but when I'm browsing the Gamefound, when I'm browsing the Kickstarter tabletop category, I have to browse through dozens and dozens and dozens of campaigns to see the ones that interest me. Every week when I'm doing my to back, not to back, I have to scroll through pages of campaigns to pick out the 5 or 7 from however many that I actually want to talk about. Versus on Gamefound, it takes me 2 seconds to find them all because they are all much more relevant to me. They start off by being relevant, and then there's less in general, and that means there's less noise to filter through, and that does increase your ability to find something and back something, and again, it comes down to the margins. That's going to be true for page navigation, that's going to be true for newsletter relatability as well. When I get a newsletter, when I get an email from Kickstarter, I almost always hit delete because the same problem is present. The fact that there's so much means it's less likely for the things to be relevant to me. When I get a newsletter from Gamefound, I click through it and read it because there's a decent chance that something in there will capture my interest. And so, again, that relatability has an impact on just how those various forms of catching people are relevant. That's going to be true as well of the recommendations and suggestions. when you're on a Kickstarter page, when you're on a Gamefound page, and you get like little pop-ups at the bottom or whatever it is of, hey, other projects that might interest you. On Gamefound, they're likely to be more relevant to your interests. On Kickstarter, there's a little harder chance of them matching to your interests because of that greater degree of noise. Project discoverability is going to be a thing as well in terms of the searching on the platform. For me, I don't know about you, I find Kickstarter search to be pretty terrible. I find that you have to be an exact match to what you're looking for, and it's very hard to really find what you want. And so I find versus on Gamefound, it's very easy to do so. And so again, those things all have a shift in terms of like more often than not, I have to use Google to find a Kickstarter campaign. Searching on Kickstarter is an absolute pain that is not great in terms of that flexibility. The page navigation. Page navigation is going to be another thing, and Kickstarter has been catching up on this one. But if you're sorting through tons and tons of information, again, 92% of users might go ahead and back the same thing either way, and it won't matter. But there are people, going back to that second of load time, the fact that there are people who a second of page load time means 7% less conversion rate, a 7% decrease in conversion rate. That means that the same thing is true on discoverability of the page itself, of being able to sort and search through the page itself. The fact that Gamefound has that little bar, and again, Kickstarter has been catching up on this one, but they have a little bar to search and jump to the shipping section, the taxes section, the VAT, without having to go ahead and scroll through things again and again and again. Those things do have an impact on the amount of people that see your page and then go ahead and back something after. Not losing a project after, not losing the updates on a campaign after the project ends is a big one as well. When you are a Kickstarter backer, you're going to go ahead and when the campaign ends, if you didn't back the project, you're lost as a backer. You no longer get updates. When it moves to the pledge manager phase, when they're going ahead and talking production, if you never backed doing the campaign page itself, you're no longer someone who will get updates or be informed of anything. On Gamefound, if you clicked follow on a project, you're going to continue to get updates whether or not you back things until you hit unfollow, which, speaking for myself, I know I usually just hit delete emails as opposed to hitting unfollow, and that's true for many people as well. And so you're going to continuously get updates. Oh, look at this. We have new miniatures and productions and last chance to go ahead and late pledge. And again, that might not convert everyone, but it will convert that extra 3% of users at the end. And all these small little edge cases, they all add up in different ways. The e-commerce familiarity is greater on Gamefound. Again, it's becoming from an e-commerce background. Kickstarter is one of those things that while Kickstarter itself has a better name brand recognition in terms of the familiarity in the space, at the end of the day, if you're coming to it as a new user of crowdfunding, Kickstarter is a bit more of a mess to try to figure things out. Between the nature of pledge levels, between the nature of add-ons, a lot of things on Kickstarter are a little bit more hodgepodge and not really standard e-commerce behavior. Whereas this Gamefound came in with much more of a standard e-commerce approach, which to a standard backer of crowdfunding projects who's gotten used to Kickstarter, it almost can seem a little bit at odds at times. But if you're coming into it as a new person, newly interested in crowdfunding, it feels more familiar to a standard e-commerce approach, and those things will make someone feel more comfortable as a user. And again, let's not take away from the Kickstarter. Kickstarter has some big numbers as far as why it might be a better platform in different ways, but Gamefound also does as well. And all of these things shift the needles in small but measurable distances on any different campaign, and they hit different campaigns differently, which is the tricky part. There are other things as well. Is keeping everything on one platform. As a Kickstarter user, you're going to have to navigate between Kickstarter and whatever pledge manager you use. As a Gamefound or BackerKit user, you're going to go ahead and stay on one platform the entire time. And again, those things will have an impact. The pre-campaign engagement, the ability to go ahead and get updates and talk about a project and be invested in and get email updates before a project ever begins. Those things are on Gamefound. That's going to be a thing that matters. The sheer quantity of payment methods. Gamefound has a ton of payment methods available, far more than Kickstarter does, to the point that you have these tiny little things that are, we have specific payment methods on the platform that only hit, these small, specific, localized countries and might only represent, 0.5% of funding on your campaign, but 0.5% is still 0.5%. And when you're looking at all these various small ways that all add up in different areas, they all have an impact. It's easy to look at crowdfunding and say, hey, I'm going to back Kaman's campaign regardless of where it is. I'm going to back it whether it's a pre-order on BackerKit, I'm going to back it whether it's a Kickstarter campaign, and I'm going to back it whether it's a Gamefound campaign. And so the numbers don't matter. But the reality is the numbers do matter. The numbers do matter in many ways in trackable data. Again, first of all, that whole 36% increased funding on a reprint and expansion on Kickstarter versus 70% reprint and expansion on Gamefound. It also matters in the type of project, because I just went through a whole list of areas where Kickstarter is better and is going to get increased margins, but I also went through a whole list of where Gamefound is better and is going to get increased margins. And the thing is, the most important bit is those things hit different audiences differently. There's a reason that you can look at certain types of campaigns and understand where those campaigns are still going to do better, even as all the platforms are continuously trying to improve themselves both from the creator standpoint, improve themselves from the consumer standpoint, trying to be the best they can possibly be. All the platforms are in that race right now. But right now you could look and see where RPGs will do better, where a lighter game will do better, where a giant miniatures big box campaign will do better, where an all-in narrative experience is going to do better, where a party game is going to do better. You can look at all these different types of campaigns and get a sense of what types of projects are right for what platforms. I can look at many projects and I can tell you some of them I can absolutely guarantee you that Gamefound is going to deliver a strong win on that campaign. I can also look at many other projects and guarantee you that Kickstarter is going to deliver the better win in that campaign. And then this is that larger area in the middle, the largest area, the unknown, the questions of like, hey, you're going to be hit by a bunch of these competing forces. You're already a larger creator bringing in your own audience, so you know that extra user base on Kickstarter is going to be less important to you. But maybe you also have a smaller price point, and so stretch pay is going to have less of an impact on you. There's these competing influences at play when you're looking at different types of projects and where they're going to do better and where they're not. The platforms do matter. The tools matter. The audience matters. The perception matters. I remember a year and a half ago, there was a large poll on the Board Game Revolution community about which platform people preferred. And even this small subset, and remember, we're always a small subset. Every community, where board game and tabletop in general is a tiny subset, but then we further divide ourselves down into like the type of user who's not just someone who's backing crowdfunding campaigns, but is active in Facebook groups, is like a subset of a subset of a subset. But within that subset of a subset of a subset, I remember a year and a half ago, the poll was asked about which platform people preferred. And I can't remember the exact breakdown, but I remember that it was a much higher percentage of people preferred Kickstarter as a platform. That same poll was run, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago on the platform. And by a large margin, Gamefound was the preferred platform for the users. Things change. Projects change. Platforms change. Perceptions change. People's preferences of where they're going to back, and those preferences do matter. Again, even if somebody sits there and says, well, I prefer one campaign, but I'll back on both, almost all of us are operating with some degree of limited budget. The same way we sit there and tell ourselves, hey, we're not really impacted by advertising. We can see that billboard, trying to sell us Coke versus Pepsi, and it doesn't affect our purchasing decisions because I already know what I want. And yet, year after year, Coke and Pepsi continue to spend billions of dollars on advertising, and I'm pretty sure they're not doing it because it's not effective. They're doing it because it is effective. It's easy to tell ourselves that some things don't matter. It's easy to sell ourselves on the lie that we're just going to do what we're going to do and these other things don't matter. But they do. The data shows it. The types of campaigns show it. The crowdfunding wars, the platform wars are very much present. And I think it's a good thing for the consumer overall. For the most part, it results in all the platforms trying to be the best they can possibly be to try to lock in the creators, to try to lock in the audience. And yes, sometimes that doesn't help the audience. When you sit there and have, because we haven't even gotten, I specifically didn't get into like features behind the scene. The fact that Gamefound will handle all your VAT for you is a creator-focused solution, not an audience-focused solution. And so yes, the platforms are going to sit there and focus on offering creator-focused solutions because those things are going to bring in creators. But they have to court the creators and the audiences alike, which means they're always going to be continuously trying, now that the competition is here, now that they're all trying to take a bite out of the same pie, a pie that is growing every year. It grows, 5-10% a year, but the problem is the platforms, if they want to grow more than 5-10% of the year, it has to come from somebody else. And that means that all the platforms are incentivized to become the best possible platform they can, both for the creator and the backer alike. The platform does matter. And the crowdfunding tabletop platform wars are overall a good thing for most of the people involved. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.